Hi, if you want to watch exclusive content with hot girls that you won't watch on YouTube, namely where Naruto roasts Kushina and Mikoto and many other hot girls without restrictions, then visit my Boosty channel at the link in the description.
She died in a really idiotic way. No, Sokka always said that this was how she would die. Not in the heat of battle, not on a mission, not protecting someone dear to her. But as a true loser. She fucking suffocated in her sleep. From her own fucking snoring. Oh, how that damn Sokka with his damn tail would laugh. If he knew. But he died before her, so no one saw the shame. In the last years of her life, Toph was all alone. By the way, about vision. It was unusual around. Light. When she raised her hands to her eyes, she stared at her palms in surprise. Such young palms, girlish. You could even say, pretty. But it was terribly unusual to see them. And to see them in general. The world around her was ablaze with different colors, the names of which she didn't know. Sokka had once tried to explain these very colors to her. He had even succeeded, although she herself would never have been able to. Red is the passion they had several times. It is the warmth of the fire that warmed their cold sides during their wanderings, it is the flashes of pleasure and the anger inside. Blue is the cold, the crisp frosty air and the embrace of water. It is the softness of his breath at night and the feeling of dewdrops on your cheeks. Blue is deep sorrow. It is the rigidity of his body at the moment of his final farewell. Emptiness and doom, he never gave her children. Now it was strange. Perhaps, she decided, this is what is called bright when it cuts unbearably into previously dead eyes. And nothing around, only this bright multicolored emptiness. And it turns out you have green eyes. And the beard doesn't suit you at all. Aang rubs his bald head sheepishly and laughs, also sheepishly. He's taller than Toph, broader in the shoulders, and stronger, but he still looks more like the little boy she first felt. She's glad to see him. She's had few friends in her life, and even fewer loved ones. Aang was almost like family. Katara kept telling me that too. Katara, despite all her quirks, is a normal woman. Glad to see you. Aang died too quickly, for Toph's taste. And the rest of the gang didn't seem to be very keen on living. Only Katara and Toph seemed to have forgotten that it was time for them to retire. Beifong had outlived her daughters, and their children, and their children's children. And then she died, motherfucker, choking on her snoring. Holy shit. What is the name of the main color around? White. And your clothes? This is orange. This is red. The red was less red than Toph had imagined, not a very good color, really, her passion was deeper and stronger. So what are we doing here, she asked. I guess I should retire, go to the spirit world. And all that. Aang's face darkened considerably. Toph's bright green eyes stared at his furrowed brows, watery eyes, and pursed lips. Momo jumped onto the avatar's shoulder, woven from white around him. Here's the thing, Aang said. In the future, there will be no spirit world. And I'd like, well, I wouldn't like you, my friends, to be affected by that. It's bad for the spirit shell and, he cut himself off, it doesn't matter. It'll make you feel bad. And who will be to blame for this? Yes, I myself, or rather, the next incarnation. Korra, have you heard of her? Toph's memory, despite her death, was atrocious. Something about that name stirred in the depths, but remained buried in the dustbin of thoughts and memories. Had she taught Korra? Or had she only heard of her? Strange. What's wrong with my memory? I didn't find you right away. Some of the memories were erased. Usually, it's not the most important fragments that disappear. Toph would argue with that. She couldn't remember her own children's names. Sun. Suna? Lin? What the hell were their names? A quick memory check showed that not only were the memories of the children gone, but the knowledge of earth and metal magic had become painfully clear. She never conquered platinum. Well, okay, Avatar. Tell me how you're doing? It doesn't matter, Aang said. There's not much time. Anyway, I want to throw you into another world. They have their own concepts of our magic. Rather flawed, but they work. Do I need to do anything for this transition? No, nothing at all. I am, roughly speaking, sending you as a parcel from one country world to another, safer one. You will be reborn there while I correct my mistakes, Aang smiled sadly. I have already sent all of ours like that. And Sokka? Aang knew about the short relationship between Katara's brother and Toph, although the lovers hid in the corners. Yes, but I can't send you to the same world as him. Restrictions. Is he at least happy? Aang snorted. Yeah, right. You can't please him. I gave him magic and now I only get a portion of grumbling. You see, he needs to wave a stick, the elements don't respond and all. If he's grumbling, that means he's happy, Toph smiled. On the one hand, her chest ached from not being able to be with Sokka, she loved him after all. On the other hand, she felt free and light. How long had it been since they had seen each other? She had outlived him by more than a century. Let her remain a tender young love. Well, I see you agree, Aang rubbed his hands, Momo twirl. Any wishes? There are a couple. Leave me my memory, magic and my body. No problem. Anything else? Vision. You will have the sharpest eyes, I will tell you both. No, bunny boy, Toph snorted. Take him away. 4. The new life was remarkably similar to the old one. Around her, monotonous voices hummed arrogantly, someone was constantly saying something ornately, expensive fabrics rustled. The garden near her house smelled simply mind-blowing, songbirds in cages quietly chirped. Toph felt like she was coming home, honest to God. She just didn't have loving parents. And there were none anyway. Yuzuko Uzumaki was born into the new world, taking Chiyo Uzumaki's life in return. Toph didn't know her new father, but her black hair, everyone whispered about it mockingly, was clearly his. The Uzumaki around her were all red-headed. Hair the color of anger and passion. There was no silence in the garden, a whole bunch of stupid children of different ages were running around. The Uzumaki had always been famous for their fertility. Yuzuko, let's go play, one of Toph's many younger sisters tugged at the sleeve of her kimono. No, Mito. I'm not playing. I don't see. Well, we can play something where we don't need vision. Come on, Yuzuko. Go to your friends. Toph's body was hers, as Aang had promised. It turned out to be stronger than it had been at that age in her past life. The earthbending and the specifics of the energy structure here had an effect, the body was all stitched together with a thin network of magical vessels. When the energy was packed into a peculiar system inside, and not splashed under a thin shell, the body suddenly became much stronger and more durable. There was a problem, though. The energy structure held up until Toph tried something more powerful than just picking up tiny rocks. The first major probing of the ground and surroundings caused the neat system of channels to burn out. Like thin, undervoltage wiring struck by lightning. It didn't hurt, it was just offensive. She had destroyed with her own hands the very possibility that she would fit into this world and be normal for it. Well, as much as she could. Now Toph was like an ocean inside, not a coherent system. The earthbending of the previous world could not be contained in thin energy vessels. Toph compared herself to a jug in which power splashed. Too bad others didn't feel it, the Uzumaki adults called her inferior. Not to her face, of course. But that was to be expected, because without channels, Toph couldn't become a shinobi. Another unfamiliar word that denoted warriors of this world. Her hair, as Toph had understood from her conversations, remained black, only with a slight red tint. And red is the family color for all Uzumaki hair, which she now belongs to. In this world, her mother, who died in childbirth, gave her a new name and a new surname, which the mage did not like at all. Toph still continued to consider her clan exclusively to be Beifong. And she only had one parent, and they remained in her past life. Sweet, calm, accepting her even after leaving the family. The Uzumaki made her nervous. For one thing, they were loud. Dead eyes heightened other senses, especially touch and hearing, so Toph suffered from the constant screams of her clanmates and the omnipresent roar. She could hear a squirrel moving miles away, but she had to endure screeching and explosions right next to her ear. Secondly, most of the clansmen smelled of death. The smell was disgusting, like rotten meat. Some smelled stronger, others weaker, but even the smallest children clearly had a distinctive odor. Thirdly, Toph herself was not particularly liked among the Uzumaki. She was different from them, she didn't wear shoes, she needed to see, had black hair, not at all clan-like, didn't look much like a normal child, didn't have a normal energy structure, and didn't talk much. She was also blind, just like in her previous life. And she didn't play with children, although Mito kept trying to establish contact. Toph didn't know which reason was the deciding factor in the overall negative attitude. She didn't really care, to be honest. Once you hit your 30s, you start to view life differently. And even the hissing about all sorts of bastards that Toph regularly heard behind her back didn't touch her at all. After all, she wasn't an Uzumaki, she was a Beifong. A pure blood, born in a legal marriage. Otherwise, life was normal and flowed smoothly forward. Toph was relieved to have overcome the period of complete helplessness and exchanged 4 years in the new old body. She was incomparably pleased to realize that now with her coordination everything is more or less normal. 4 years is enough time to learn to wipe yourself and hold chopsticks firmly in your hands. Toph even dressed herself, at first more resembling a scarecrow than a girl. Mito's little sister, the Uzumaki were all siblings, was disappointed in Toph and angrily stomped off toward the other children. Beifong shook her head slightly, redirecting her attention to the birds. The Uzumaki kept them in cages all over the garden, so that the singing would never stop for a second. The birds in the cages strained, raping their little throats. They were either begging for freedom or dreaming of it. Or maybe they were remembering past lives, as Toph had done in her first months in the new world. Well, what else can a baby do? Just think and sleep. She was a quiet child, she cried little, ate a lot, and stared her dead eyes into the void. They didn't love her, they might forget to change her diapers or not feed her on time. After all, there were so many other loud lumps of flesh, real Uzumaki, who were screaming their throats from the moment they were born. No problem, she survived. Without any complications. Well, the cool attitude of the adults can't be considered as complications, can it? Toph snorted and rose carefully to her feet. The discrepancy between her adult soul and her small body was especially detrimental to her coordination. Beifong was constantly trying to walk and act like a grown, well-built woman. But her body's center of gravity was that of a girl and a child, so Toph calculated angles with enviable consistency. Nobody was bothered by this. Well, she was blind. It was good that she didn't fall down the stairs. Numerous golden bracelets jingled on her feet with every step. The clan leader assured that they were needed for safety, but Toph herself compared them more to a leash or a beacon. No one wanted problems, because a blind girl suddenly got into trouble and spilled something important to everyone. And blood is thicker than water, although Toph was not liked in the clan. Toph was in no hurry to take off her bracelets. Firstly, the metal control was still malfunctioning, and the gold did not flow obediently in her fingers. Secondly, it was not the time. By the age of 12, Toph had decided to leave home, as in her past life. Let it be a new tradition. The earth spread out beneath their feet, but responded reluctantly to their steps. The picture of reality was perceived with distortions. Everything in the world was saturated with bright energy, and it resisted. Did not allow itself to be counted. In order to somehow interact with a new, strong earth, they had to remember the lessons of the badger moles. Contact was established slowly but surely. By the time she was 10, Toph planned to finally tame this earth and regain full control over the elements. And maybe even become a little stronger than before. It seemed that in this world, the strongest element was wood. And a tree, with sufficient imagination and stubbornness, can be perceived as earth. With a very well-developed imagination. 5. Senju and Uchiha again? Toph stopped at the sound of familiar names. The voices were coming from a tea house, and Beifong recognized them immediately, 2 clan elders. Relatively nice old men, albeit alcoholics. They weren't drinking tea in the tea house. Yes, those. There is no escape from them, they cut each other, and the rest suffer and get caught in the crossfire. Our good guys got kicked so hard a week ago that they barely remembered their names. For this we must. There was the sound of a tight cork popping open, then a quick gurgle. There was a brief whiff of alcohol, not sake, but something stronger that Toph hadn't tried yet. After a few heavy gulps, the elders exhaled heavily and groaned contentedly. Toph approached the edge of the shoji, almost giving away her location with the jingling of her bracelets. But the elders had clearly been drinking tea for several hours, so they were quite tipsy. They didn't notice. "Hey, hero, that kid from Nara suggested something interesting." "Well? Find a woman for 2 heirs. Like, to unite the clans." The second old man chuckled vulgarly. "Yes, when you have 1 girl for 2, it's somehow inconvenient to fight later." "Wait a minute, don't laugh, a new portion of gurgles, a tasty soup. They'll take a woman from ours." Eh? Eh? What am I talking about? We didn't get involved in the war. No. Shinigami is my witness, I won't give my red-haired ones to these sheep for slaughter. They'll survive. Quiet down. You're getting all worked up. Here's some more tea. Toph moved away silently, her bare feet sliding across the wooden floor. She had learned everything she needed to know. The red-haired ones won't be given away. She was the only one in the clan who had beautiful black hair from her father. 8. The first introduction of the heirs and their future wife turned out to be rather boring. Toph didn't know what to talk about with 2 boys. Even if they were her future suitors. The only good news was that the wedding was planned for Yuzuko Uzumaki's 13th birthday. So Toph would no longer be within the clan's reach. The gold flowed through her fingers like liquid wax. She could remove her shackle bracelets at any time, and no seals would hinder her. The boys were looking at her, one with reserved interest, the other with seething interest. There was no hint of displeasure about them, and their expressions were quite friendly. Toph saw this because she was carefully tapping her fingers on the floor where she was sitting. Terrible impudence, really. Not according to etiquette. But since it was only her and her suitors in the room, Toph allowed herself such a liberty. "Uzumaki-san," said the calmer of the boys, "do you have anything against us or our clans?" The second nodded quickly, but then, catching himself, hummed in agreement. He was like a blade of grass dancing in the wind. The first one reminded Toph more of a volcano, solid and calm on the outside, but with magma seething inside. Beifong felt this boiling energy on the tip of her tongue, like a large snake. No, Uchiha-san, Senju-san. How can she be against it? She simply won't show up for the wedding, so let them do whatever they want. And there's no point in the suitors getting on their nerves with unreasonable behavior. Especially not the Vulcan boy. But the boys could not escape the taunting words. "I think," Toph drawled in a thin, childish voice, "that you, dear heirs, will be against it." "Huh? Why?" The blade of grass boy perked up. Aang was of the same breed, thin, sonorous, nimble. Over time, such people grow into granite rocks and mighty oaks, but in childhood you will not expect a drop of seriousness from them. Toph stopped tapping the floor. She was kneeling, so her field of view immediately narrowed to an arm's length. After all, she was too weak to manipulate dust properly, although the rough iron and fine gold gave in early. She hadn't seen platinum yet, so she didn't know if she would obey her. "Uzumaki-san?" The volcano spoke up. She didn't know their names, so she had to make do. They weren't told her name either, tradition. They would only be able to get to know each other in this sense during the wedding. Well, or they just won't meet, considering Toph's plans. "Actually, I was forbidden to talk about it," Beifong said hesitantly. "Can there be secrets between spouses?" the volcano said ingratiatingly, honey-sweetly. Travinka sat quietly, not showing off. You can tell right away who had what kind of upbringing in the clan. Vulcan was probably prepared, and harshly, to accept the title. And Travinka was given time to enjoy childhood, so he didn't butt in. Smart kids, uncharacteristically mature. This world was generally distinguished by children maturing too quickly. 5-year-olds can already be murderers. At 3 years old, a child with a chakra system spoke well and often knew how to read. Surprisingly fast development, abnormal. So Toph didn't think of the boys in front of her as little children. No, you could talk to them like they were fully formed individuals. All they lacked was experience, but with the pace of life here, that would quickly pass. Toph moved her hand to the floor and placed her fingers on it. Oh, I think so too, spouses. Beifong strained her diaphragm, and 2 spots of blush appeared on her cheekbones. The elders discussed it, said that someone like me is not needed, because I am blind, you see. And also, I will not be able to have children. Toph didn't bother to clarify that ninja with a chakra system simply wouldn't be able to impregnate her. She was a sweet child who dreamed of marriage. And all sorts of men who were unable to break through her magical immunity with their pathetic chakra. Well, she needed someone with an extremely powerful hearth, capable of controlling at least 5 local elements. There were no such shinobi in the Uzumaki clan, and Toph had already decided that her demands were a bit too high. She barely finished speaking when she tapped her fingers on the floor. Vulcan guessed her maneuver, judging by her facial expression. He clearly understood that her tapping was doing something, but he couldn't imagine what exactly. He seemed to relax at the information about childlessness. He dropped his shoulders, raised the corners of his lips. Didn't want children? Travinka reacted more violently. He rose from the floor, frowned, and tensed up. Now that was the one who really wanted a big family. This can definitely be cured, he said with conviction. The Senja clan has the coolest doctors. A developed Sharingan can view chakra channels to a certain extent. Not like the Hyuga, of course, but enough to detect pathologies. Don't worry, Uzumaki-san, we will solve this problem. And if not? Both clans will end the war, the Uchiha volcano grinned grimly. There are plenty of orphans. 11. The engagement was planned 2 years before the supposed wedding, which made Toph a little nervous. She didn't want to commit herself to anything, she had already given up on that in her past life. After the deep blue grief over Sokka and the falling out with the father of her first child, personal memory was completely erased. From her past life, Toph remembered only that she had 2 children. No names, no gender. But Sokka and all the adventures with Aang remained and were kept by her, like gold coins, by a stingy merchant. The Uzumaki had arranged everything in the best possible way. They dressed her in a rather comfortable suit of dark red color, she asked, hung a lot of jewelry. It would be convenient to melt them down into weapons if necessary, and even made Toph something like soft moccasins through which she could feel the ground well. Wearing shoes was unusual, and Beifong promised herself that this was the first and last time. She was used to walking barefoot. The engagement was held in an old temple that smelled strongly of rot. At first, Toph didn't even want to go into the building, she felt physically ill from the stench. But then one of the Uzumaki men simply picked her up and forcibly carried her under the heavy roof. An angry, hungry energy swirled inside. It rushed from one shinobi to another, trying to bite off a piece, to do something, to satiate itself. It didn't work, the chakra system interfered, blocking the magical power from such encroachments. But Toph had no such protection. The monk was reading some texts over her, and a familiar but grown-up blade of grass and volcano were standing next to her. They saw that she was not feeling well and were supporting her from both sides, sort of. Toph was so sick that she couldn't see or hear, trying to stay conscious. The worst thing was that she couldn't take a single step to leave this terrible temple. All her attention was focused on the 13 huge hungry figures standing behind the monk. Before her dead eyes, in the eternal darkness, their masks flashed one after another, horned, hairy, with bared fanged mouths. Evil. Hungry. Hungry. Then the one in the middle reached out and ripped her stomach open with his claw. This definitely wasn't real. Toph checked her skin later, not a scratch. But the pain was so bad that the girl arched her back and screamed. Quiet, quiet, mortal spark, the clawed one laughed. Quiet. He pulled a bright blue stream from her, then pulled 2 thin nets out of the darkness and mixed them all together. 2 other boyish screams mixed in with Toph's. Beifong was bent back almost into the bridge, her feet rooted to the darkness. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a blade of grass and a volcano writhing nearby. They were only slightly better off than she was. The masks laughed and spun around. Claude separated the 2 webs, now holding a strong current of energy from Toph's belly, and shoved them back into the humans. Then the world went dark. 12. Toph celebrated her 12th birthday in a very bad mood. First, she was soaked to the skin. She fell through the thin spring ice on a small river she hadn't noticed. She was lost in thought, walking automatically, and didn't even notice that it wasn't the ground under her feet, but the dammed cataract water. Secondly, because of the damp hair, it was a bit cool on the head and the ears were freezing. Not fatal, but unpleasant. Thirdly, the fish caught while swimming, judging by the burnt smell, will be a bad dinner. And Toph hasn't eaten normal meat for over a week, all withered last year's berries and bark, damn it. I also managed to find a few dubious mushrooms and steal a circle of fluffy lavash from the caravan. In general, Toph even lost a little weight. And fourthly, they found her again. How? Toph had no idea. She took off her bracelets, changed her clothes, threw away all the old things. There was nothing left on her that belonged to the clan. Only the blood and the body itself. Well, Yuzuko-chan, what are we going to do? The Uzumaki man asked with a clear smile in his voice, sitting down opposite the frail fire and Toph herself. Beifong pursed her lips. This Uzumaki was a first-class tracker, she had already seen that. But she was pretty good at evading his attention, even if only for a little while. So it turned out that, on the one hand, she could run away from him at any moment, on the other hand, this flight did not last longer than a couple of days. Uzumaki unsealed the juicy, oil-sizzling meat from the scroll. He bit into it. He chomped. Toph, her expression unchanged, picked up her burnt fish. It was raw inside and tasted like mud. They ate in silence, then Uzumaki sprawled on the cold ground, propped his head up with his hand and lit up some pleasant-smelling tobacco. He took deep drags and exhaled through his nose, noisily and with great pleasure. Toph was silent. She just pulled magma from the deep layers of the earth towards her. Not too close, but close enough to sit warmly. You see, Yuzuko-chan, Uzumaki drawled between puffs, you are not as important to the clan as Aldeheim and others. But you are still an Uzumaki, so you have a lot of clan seals on you. Our children were often kidnapped. Uzumaki are good spouses, regardless of gender. So we developed patterns to return the children. We slap them right on the skin, so we can find them at the ends of the earth. But no one stole you, you ran away yourself. Why, Yuzuko-chan? Toph was silent. The magma was boiling unacceptably close to the surface, and Uzumaki felt it too. During their first encounter, the tracker tried to talk and take sweet Yuzuko-chan home voluntarily, then attacked. After a few painful clicks for the body and pride from Toph and her escapes, the tracker returned to its original tactic, pressing Toph's ears with conversations. And magma, again. And you are full of surprises, Yuzuko-chan. And the element of metal, and earth, and now magma. You don't control wood by any chance? Very weak. Well, what age are you? Toph's tree was really almost unyielding, there was too little earth in it. More water, perhaps. Katara seemed to be able to control the vines. Toph spread out her jacket and lay down on it. Steam rose from the ground, and the remaining snow around her quickly melted. The clumsy magma swayed lazily beneath the earth, warming Toph's shoulder blades. What's the sky like now? Toph asked. Beautiful, the bloodhound responded. At night. There are more stars than fish in the sea, they are scattered across the canvas like dust. When you look at this beauty, you feel insignificant and pathetic. His voice was rich, low, and pleasant, sending a tickling vibration through Toph's ribs. She almost fell asleep to the measured murmur of his voice when Uzumaki quietly asked. Why are you running away, Yuzuko-chan? What drives you? Does the hunter want to understand his prey? Something like that. Toph folded her hands over her sunken stomach and smiled slightly. I'm not running away, I'm leaving. Running away is when you plan to return to the same place, even in your thoughts. I just want to leave. For good? Definitely. The Uzumaki don't let their own go that easily, Yuzuko-chan. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a job, nor would the other 3 rangers. Uzumaki's mood changed like a spring wind, from softness to sharp edges of blades, from good nature to steel. The thin needles intended to paralyze Toph Sanbon did not even reach her. They were stuck in a layer of the finest dust swirling around. Then the earth exploded into 1,000 streams of magma, and it became really hot. The next time he found her was 2 months later. She was still 12. "How are you, Yuzuko-chan? Have you managed to master the tree? It doesn't bend too well." The next meeting took place in a noisy, sweat and spice-scented market in a city on the edge of the desert. In the days when shinobi were just beginning to think about unification, ordinary people had long ago unraveled the secret of strength. Unity. "Take these peaches, Yuzuko-chan, they look absolutely amazing." "It looks like it," Toph replied, not even touching the peaches. Her trip to the market was yet another attempt to find a suitable headband for her hair. Toph was getting tired of her long braid whipping her, but as she walked, the Uzumaki tracker, whose name she never learned, tagged along, commenting on the merchandise, gallantly holding Toph by the elbow, and scaring away overly persistent merchants with a single smile. There was no headband, which really pissed Toph off. She could have made one herself, out of wood or metal, but she wanted to buy something that would remind her of her past life. The bracelet, an exact copy of which Sokka had once given her, she was making herself. She and Uzumaki walked between the decrepit benches and tried not to step on the fabric counters spread out right on the ground. Toph succeeded, but the man did not always. "Are we looking for something specific?" Uzumaki asked. "I need a hairband. I'm tired of my braid." "Well, then cut it off," the Pathfinder chuckled. "It would be really nice to get rid of the length." Toph herself understood that Uzumaki had grabbed her hair many times during short fights. But she was so used to long locks that she categorically did not want to get rid of them. No, she would keep the length. "Let's go," Uzumaki pulled her to the side. "I saw a couple of stalls with hairpins not far from here." Toph followed the hunter obediently. Anyway, by unspoken agreement, in the cities and towns, they were just good acquaintances. No attacks and, God forbid, no fights. Uzumaki led Toph to a shop she had passed several times. No wonder the counter had no connection to the ground, the cunning saleswoman had hung it on several thin chains for shock value. Without the tracker, Toph would have passed by the 4th and 5th time. While the chatty Uzumaki charmed the merchant, Toph sorted through hairpins and headbands. The gods of fortune were on her side. Soon the mage found an excellent headband based on metal. Judging by the energy response, the accessory was decorated with white and red gold. Right there on the spot, Toph unbraided her hair, combed it through with her fingers, and quickly pulled it up into her usual high hairstyle. Her neck felt cold, but her head felt light, as if Toph had cut off her braid. "Oh, Yuzuko-chan, it suits you," Uzumaki assessed. "Let me buy you this trinket. I have money." "This is for your wedding," the ranger waved his hand. "Don't upset the old man, accept the gift." Toph shrugged. If she wanted to spend money, fine. She would need the money herself to continue her round-the-world voyage. Because of the ranger, she hadn't been able to get to know this world properly, although she had improved her combat skills and reaction speed quite well. Well, every cloud has a silver lining. Uzumaki took Toph's elbow again and gently pulled her towards the exit. Beifong felt rather than realized that one of the energy seals had been placed on her skin. "I'm not going to run away," Toph said, patting the man's arm patronizingly. "What, you mean it's time for you to come home?" Toph didn't answer, shaking her head vaguely. She didn't have bangs yet. Beifong remembered how hair hid half her face, so she didn't cut it any earlier than she had to, and her hair was tightly held in place by the headband. A familiar, almost forgotten feeling. "I was married before the gods, as I recall," Toph said slowly. So it would be wrong to disappoint the local kami. Which she didn't believe in. 13. Toph wasn't entirely sure how Uzumaki had managed to contact the clan, but by the time Beifong arrived in the red-haired clan's territory, they were in full swing preparing for the upcoming wedding. Well, yes, she had just turned 13. Right on the way to Uzushio, surrounded by water on all sides. I didn't want to remember how Toph had overcome the sea during her escape. Beifong had never liked water. The journey back was filled with delicious food and long conversations with the talkative Uzumaki, and cold, crisp nights. She lay on the ground for long periods, staring into the dead darkness. Remembering what it was like to have sight. wondering why she had given it up. On the one hand, her combat potential turned out to be even higher than before. Her eyes would probably get in the way. She would have to tie them up with a ribbon or make an iron bandage. On the other hand, she could at least see the world occasionally. She had the opportunity to get rid of her blindness. She had, but for some reason she decided to keep it. Well, at least I looked at Aang and Momo. And at the scary masks too. No vision was needed here. And thanks to these masks and the strange clawed spirit, she saw her suitors. Vulcan and a blade of grass. One was disheveled, stocky, and black-haired, the other was thin, elongated, with very long eyelashes and dark eyes. Uzumaki led her to them for slaughter. The guys, of course, looked normal, and their behavior was not annoying. But marriage in this world did not imply equality, not at all. A wife was more of a beautiful addition to her husband, often powerless and speechless. An incubator for heirs. Does the blind bandit need this? Yuzuko-chan, you are so beautiful. Toph smiled politely but coolly. Yes, she was beautiful. She believed it even without her sight. All that white and mascara and jewelry could make anyone look beautiful, really. Beifong was wearing shoes again, this time wooden ones. Toph had literally been blinded by strong iron clasps. Fortunately, they were easy enough to remove, and Beifong always maintained a large cloud of fine dust around herself. Her new vision was perfect for moments like these. The wedding was planned for midday, the time when the gods could look down on the earth. And, thank those same gods, not in that temple with the masks. The ceremony was divided into 3 parts, 2 of which Toph planned to skip, the Uchiha, Senju, and Uzumaki clan's fraternization ritual, the marriage itself, its confirmation, in Toph's opinion, too early. Her body was only 13. Before the second part, Toph had to ceremoniously remove all the subjugating, blocking, and signal seals so that they could hang beacons for her husbands. Well, she was practically a beast in the eyes of the locals, she needed to be looked after. Toph walked with difficulty, she even had to ask for help. From that same Uzumaki tracker, of course. Why was he relaxing? Let him take responsibility, since he dragged her to this wedding. You know that if something goes wrong, they'll skin me alive? Uzumaki asked, smiling broadly at the audience. That's the point, Toph said in the friendliest possible tone. Why should I suffer alone? The ranger grumbled softly, but continued to carefully lead the girl to the improvised altar. The clan heads and their heirs were standing there now, with the exception of Uzumaki's. What kind of problems exactly are you facing? Toph asked anyway. Despite everything, she managed to become attached to the Pathfinder. Sealing the chakra as the most extreme punishment. But that's unlikely, I'm a really good tracker. Someone will have to track you down when you escape. Such a calm discussion of Toph's escape did Uzumaki credit. The tracker had no doubt that she would succeed, if only because he had not given anyone a report on her abilities. And they had not asked him, he brought her, and that was fine. Amazing carelessness and indifference. Even if Toph is a defective Uzumaki. I like you, Yuzuko-chan, Uzumaki said. So here's some advice, leave before the elders unroll the scrolls. Otherwise, the seal's base will transfer to your skin. And I can complete them even though I'm as bad at Fuan as I am at cooking. What are the scrolls tied with? Oh, that's the best, the man stretched his lips into a grin, with gold threads. The news was indeed good. Uzumaki handed Toph over practically from hand to hand, respectfully bowed his head to the Uchiha and Senju heirs, and stepped out of Toph's dust vision radius. But she didn't care. She saw her suitors. I saw it. Every feature, every shadow, every little detail of the wedding dresses. The volcano and the blade of grass stood before Toph's eyes as clearly as Aang had once. And it was too strange for someone who, in her 2 lives, had had vision for no more than 10 minutes total. Because of this stupor, Toph almost missed the moment of the end of the fraternization. The clans, represented by their heads, swore to end the civil war and make peace. The Uzumaki acted as mediators. What was pleasant was that there was no word about Toph's obligatory participation and her role in all this disgrace. Chauvinism would be their undoing. To put it simply, Toph's presence, and even her marriage, to the heirs, played no role in the peace deal. On paper. And what was actually happening, she didn't really care. The Uzumaki elders came closer to the girl, while the others, on the contrary, took a few steps back. Vulcan and the blade of grass, wary, hesitated for a few seconds. It was funny to see how their brows furrowed. Earthen vision usually did not provide such details. As a gesture of goodwill, we, the Uzumaki clan, remove all seals from this woman, one of the elders began solemnly. Toph felt an itch all over her body, and then a feeling of true freedom came over her. It was as if a kilogram of rope had been lifted from her. The second elder took the scroll in his hands. The clasp really turned out to be in the form of golden threads. As a gesture of goodwill, we place new seals on this woman, seals of submission to her highborn husbands. Vulcan twitched, but was held back by a man nearby. Perhaps his father. Travinka exchanged glances with his own. Perhaps this is unnecessary, asked the elder Senju. That's the tradition, one of the elders responded in an adamant tone and tried to remove the thread from the scroll. Naturally, he failed. With a gesture of goodwill, Toph drawled, straightening her arms parallel to the ground, "This woman frees the Uzumaki clan from her presence. You don't want a defective girl, do you?" Toph's fingers tightened sharply, and the ground rose up. Spinning around, Beifong raised her arms, creating spikes around her, forcing the shinobi to jump a considerable distance away. No seals on her body. None. The elements flowed at Toph's will, turning into sharp rocks and slippery wet clay. Having thrown off her wooden shoes and uncomfortable outerwear, Beifong gained real power, vision, and maneuverability. Roots moved in the ground around them, trees sprouted, imbued with alien energy. Toph waved them away, not letting them get close. Flames flared, lightning crackled, close, but not close enough to hurt. More likely, they were simply trying to force Toph into a position that was convenient for the others. There were too many shinobi around to defeat. However, Toph didn't necessarily need to defeat anyone. She could simply get away from Uzumaki Island and then disappear into the new world. There were no more seals, neither tracking nor binding. And Toph has always been good at hiding. Equals 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 second equals 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 equals. Commentary on the second. Honestly, I plan to post this chapter in 2 days. However, Deciali Tordic, with his 2-page commentary, strongly encouraged me to reduce the time. The chapter is seriously shorter than the previous one. But you read the warning in the header, right? Enjoy reading. Aloha. 1. He first met her on the day of his death. Izuna was absolutely certain that he was dying, and this was later confirmed. Tobarama slashed his back to death, but she was somehow able to mystically bring him back to life. Moreover, with eyes, with vision, and even with the highest Sharingan. And he definitely gave it to his brother. It was strange for Izuna to open his eyes after a short, bitter oblivion, after realizing his own fate and accepting death, after a sour, sickening farewell to his brother and gifting Madara with his eyes, after. "Stop staring into space, I can hear that you've woken up," were the first words Izuna heard. His body turned out to be weak, feeble, and sickly. He only had enough strength to turn his head and wince in annoyance. It was as if needles were being stuck into his spine. But he was able to see his supposed savior. More precisely, at first, he thought that a man had saved him. Her clothes were closed, not even showing her Adam's apple, and all in steel inserts, on her eyes a wide iron band, on her wrists and ankles heavy bracelets, apparently made of gold. Her hair was gathered in a high hairstyle and held in place with a hoop, which would suit both a girl and a man. The voice, although high-pitched for a boy, could still be male. Therefore, the decisive factor in determining the gender was the slang women did not speak it in Izuna's memory. Dead, or what? His savior drawled, puzzled. "Oh, be quiet, I hear he's alive. Although I should probably stuff some herbs up his ass, oh well, don't whine, I'll give him some infusion. Although it would be more effective through the ass, shut up." Izuna then closed his eyes tiredly. Great, he thought then. A madman saved him. The savior was in no hurry to talk to him anymore. Izuna himself kept silent. For several days he endured various machinations against himself, because he was as weak as a newborn kitten. He drank decoctions, raised and lowered his hands on orders, secretly did gymnastics for his eyes, grafted, by the way, bright blue, but with a working Sharingan. Tried to understand the gender of his savior and find out his daily routine. The latter, by the way, did not exist in principle. By the way, there really were needles in Uchiha's back. The savior used them to treat Izuna so that he could walk and be a shinobi. The savior pronounced the last word with a strange intonation, and it seemed to Uchiha that he was mocking him. The gender issue was resolved abruptly, on the 4th day of treatment. The savior simply returned to the hut in which she, exactly she, had nursed Izuna, who was too dirty. Streams of silt ran down her clothes like green, slimy waterfalls. So the savior simply decided to change. In front of Izuna. Not at all embarrassed by him. Izuna himself was more embarrassed. At 24, he had seen women and even touched them, but it seemed somehow wrong to him to watch an ordinary change of clothes. "Why are you acting like a virgin?" the savior asked then. "Either watch already, or close your eyes and calm down. Your nerves and doubts are simply poisoning the air." Izuna's ears, cheekbones, and neck turned red, like a young boy who had been caught near the baths. But he continued to watch. His rescuer did not have a feminine figure. Rather, she was strong, not too tall, but with strong, dry muscles, small breasts that did not need a garter. There was no hair on her body at all, not even on her pubis. And the girl was at least 16, judging by her bones. Maybe even 20. She changed into clean clothes, simply throwing the dirty ones into the corner. "Are you hungry?" she asked. This is how their conversations began. She didn't give her name, although she easily learned it from Izuna. When she learned that he was an Uchiha, she winced slightly, but didn't comment on his origins. In exchange for saving his, Izuna's, life, she demanded that he simply tell her how he ended up on the brink. Out of stupidity, Izuna admitted honestly then. "I'd been at odds with one shinobi for a long time, Tobarama Senju." She winced again, which didn't go unnoticed, and things got a little out of control. "A little," the savior nodded in agreement. "He just killed you a little." "It's my own fault," Izuna responded philosophically. "I challenged him to a fight, but we didn't discuss the terms. I just feel sorry for my brother, he loves me." "Older, younger?" "Senior." Madara. Her brother's name meant nothing to her, which surprised Izuna. Not knowing the current clan leader? Amazing. She treated him for 5 more days. Acupuncture, bittersweet infusions, mild gymnastics, and point energy infusions, not chakras. The latter felt like a serious electric shock, but after them Izuna felt as if he had been reborn. And the treatment was too fast, even the Senju did not pull half-dead creatures back from the other world with such speed. In recent days, Izuna helped the savior around the house. He simply swept dirt out of the corners, which the blind girl simply could not see, scraped off several suspicious stains, looked through the dishes, fabrics, and everything else he could for imperceptible but visible dirt and holes. The savior did not interfere, she just smiled weakly, but gratefully. On the last day of treatment, already standing on the threshold of the swamp hut, Izuna finally decided to ask, where did she get the eyes with the Sharingan? Did she kill someone from the clan, or what? Lately, after the founding of this Konoha, no one from the clan has died yet. So where did she get her eyes? He was afraid to ask about the blueness of the eyes, to be honest. The savior then shrugged her shoulders vaguely and bowed her head. She was listening to someone who stood behind her shoulder and with whom she was constantly talking. When she thought that Izuna did not see or hear it. "Think of them as a gift," she said. "Don't worry about it. These eyes are brand new." Izuna didn't elaborate. After briefly saying goodbye to the swamp, which, who else could a blind girl be, living in a swamp all alone and communicating with emptiness? He ran towards Konoha at top speed. He still needed to calm his brother down and make him happy with his return, and then figure out how to thank his savior. But the next time Izuna came to the familiar swamp, neither the hut nor the witch were there. Madara, who wanted to accompany his resurrected brother, looked around with interest. "She should be here," Izuna tried to justify himself. "Did you really think that a real witch would wait for your human gratitude?" Madara chuckled in response. Izuna remained silent. 2. The second time he met her, he didn't meet her where he expected. The witch showed up right in Konoha, in a small diner. The girl was eating her third huge bowl of greasy ramen with gusto. Izuna was hardly surprised to see her. She was a witch, after all, and her appearance should be magical and unexpected. He sat down next to her, waving away the offered menu. The witch mumbled something in greeting from behind her bowl of ramen. Apparently, she recognized her previous patient. I never thanked you enough, Izuna said. Do you want me to pay for the ramen? The witch finished her broth, waved her hand at the owner. She didn't realize that he was standing with his back to her and didn't see her movement and chuckled with interest. Do you value your life on a couple of bowls of noodles? She asked mockingly. Izuna blushed. To avoid answering, he called out to the shop owner and ordered 2 more servings of ramen. It's just like that, he tried to explain. Not on account of the debt. The witch hissed, but somehow without any fire. More tiredly than discontentedly. You have no debts, she said. I wanted to help you, and I helped you. That's all. The rest is just your imagination. She ate both portions that were brought to her. Izuna couldn't swallow a single piece and, having paid for herself with a piece of gold the size of a child's fist, left. Izuna kept the gold for himself. The shop owner got the usual ryo. The civilian did not dare to protest, although he looked unkindly at the Uchiha's arbitrariness. The yellow metal makes an excellent amulet. 3. The third meeting was as unexpected as the first 2. But more unpleasant, it must be admitted. They met in the dungeon. Izuna was thrown into the same cell where the witch was already lying. She was wrapped in suppression seals so tightly that the paper formed a cocoon. The witch's expression, however, was very philosophical. And she reacted very indifferently to Izuna's appearance. He, beaten, was thrown into the cell with all his might. And she said, "Eh." And she fell silent. Izuna, unable to be angry, he had been beaten up badly after all, simply sprawled out next to the cocoon witch and, with relief, pressed his hot forehead to the cold, damp, slippery stones. He was taken away for interrogation several more times, trying to find out the real strength of the Uchiha and the clan's secret places. Each time he was returned to the cell, in a state that was even worse than before. Are you going to the other world again? The witch asked after the 4th interrogation. She continued to lie there as a cocoon. She didn't even move or try to get out. Are you still going to chill out here? Izuna hissed back. I'm resting. But you can really kick the bucket, by the way. Izuna would argue with that. During the interrogation, he clearly heard the enemy shinobi's plans for himself and the girl. They wanted to sell him back to the clan or to the highest bidder. But the witch. Of course, they were afraid to rape her. Everyone in the Konoha area and even further knew about the swamp witch. As well as the fact that she was not a shinobi, but something like a yokai. Or a small kami. But not by rape alone, as they say. A shinobi is always ready to die, Izuna snapped, more worried about his friend than about himself. Well, really. He was used to torture, and Madara would find him in a couple of hours. The beacon on his lower back was noticeably warm, which meant his brother was nearby. And the witch? She had gentle hands, almost aristocratic, and no scars on her skin, as far as Izuna remembered. Only her legs were rough, but the witch always went barefoot. And so, the body of a highborn, and that's all. Even if trained. The leader of the gang wanted healing from her. The witch refused. They sealed her, and now they are going to torture her so that she will finally heal the leader. And she considers it a simple vacation. Don't get so worked up, the witch snorted at Izuna's changed mood. You're poisoning the air with your anger. Can you get out? Izuna asked. The witch twitched the corner of her lips. Thanks to you? Of course. He didn't have time to react. Shinobi bandits burst into the cell. This time, it wasn't for his soul. They placed the cocoon with the witch upright, and Izuna was finally able to examine her. No bruises, just a scratch on her cheek deep, it might leave a scar. No iron jewelry, no steel inserts on her clothes. Everything had been torn off, obviously with force. Here and there, the green and yellow fabric of the witch's unusual outfit grinned in untidy rags. The shinobi were telling her something, Izuna wasn't listening. Suddenly, all attention was focused on her smile, calm and weak, like the distant light of a swamp fire. The amulet, forged from which gold Uchiha was able to hide it under his shirt, and the decoration was not taken away, spread across Izuna's chest like a blotch, before turning into a bunch of tiny needles. Obeying the girl's will, these needles dug into the eyes and mouths of the shinobi, tore the seals holding the witch, flashed before Izuna's eyes in golden flashes. Then the chamber collapsed. The stone simply collapsed, as if the room were the mouth of some enormous golem. Izuna was unharmed, the stones lined up above him, creating a life-saving capsule. When they parted, Izuna realized that he was no longer underground. The witch stood next to him, thoughtfully sniffing the fresh night air. "Listen," she said. "I've figured out how you'll repay me." "And how so?" "Help me get settled in Konoha," the witch smiled broadly and disarmingly. "I'm sick and tired of your swamps, I can't stand it." Third Madara tiredly put the papers aside and rubbed his eyes. He wanted to throw the damned documents with all his might somewhere far away, so that he would never find them again. But he couldn't. Because the damned papers were needed for the prosperity of not only the clan, but the entire village. Konoha. How the idiot Hashirama managed to convince him to found a village, Madara absolutely did not understand. After all, the Uchiha knew from the very beginning that a village is, first of all, a pile of garbage, a pile of people and a pile of paperwork that would have to be dealt with. And subconsciously, Madara guessed that the papers would go to him, and not to the frisky goat Senju. It would have been boreas for Tom to sit day after day with papers. Hashirama ran around the growing village, really resembling a mountain goat. He built houses, resolved minor conflicts, won the adoration of people and smiled shamelessly, while Madara balanced the debit with the credit, quarreled with suppliers, conducted secret trade and did not let the beautiful picture fall apart. And after all, there was also the Uchiha clan, in which some vague whispers began to say that Madara was not a very good leader. He did not even become Hokage. Of course he didn't. Kage is a public figure, and Madara hated people since childhood. It's better this way, in a separate office, behind 7 seals. Even if no one knows that it was Uchiha who was the glue that kept the newly formed village from falling apart. And how well it all started, he might not even have children, glory to his potential runaway wife. Madara was content with 1 heir or heiress, 2 at most, to have a spare. But not the 5 or 6 that Hashirama dreamed of. Although, if they had 1 wife for both of them, and each clan, including Uzumaki, of course, needed at least 1 heir, that's already 3. And with the spare, those same 6. Even if everyone will be orphans due to the inability to get pregnant with Uzumaki Yuzuko. His thoughts had clearly wandered in the wrong direction, so Madara began to sort documents into folders and drawers. He wouldn't be able to work normally anyway, so at least he would tidy up and rest. Hashirama, it seemed, left takoyaki at home. Or tamagoyaki? Something tasty. Everyone knew that the heads of the Uchiha and Senju clans lived together. Fortunately, this was an old story, so it was not discussed very actively. And everyone knew that the joint wife had run away from the then heirs. Madara smiled against his will. No, really? He would never have thought that a blind girl could be strong enough to scatter 3 clans without much effort. She hadn't received a single wound during her escape. Madara had seen this with his Sharingan. Hashirama's father had confirmed this after the pursuit had ceased. She had barely soiled her clothes with earth and had effectively swaddled most of the shinobi present. She had lured the ninja onto a flat plateau, where the ground had suddenly turned into quicksand, and then into granite. The way Uzumaki Yuzuko controlled the elements was incredible. Amazing. Impossible. From interrogations of an experienced tracker, who, it turns out, had been chasing Yuzuko for over a year, it turned out that the girl owned not only earth, but also metal, magma, sand, and wood. She managed the latter rather poorly, as she herself said, a little. And even a little is impossible, unless you are Senju. There was something that bothered Madara, and that he had never discussed with anyone. He wasn't sure about his vision, or what he had seen during Yuzuko's escape. He had come to the wedding after a protracted mission, where the Uchiha had used the Sharingan at full power. His vision had been blurry after that, and the picture had sometimes doubled. But it was possible, just possible, that in Uzumaki Yuzuko's blind eyes he had seen extra pupils, the dim tomo of the Sharingan. 2, to be exact. He didn't even tell Hashirama about it, although he didn't have to worry about looking stupid in front of his own husband. Senju, surprisingly, took the fact that they were now a family seriously. Despite the lack of a proper connecting link, which preferred to free the clans of its own free will. The papers were sorted out, the walls of the office were decorated with bright lines of blocking Fuin. Madara went out into the street in a very favorable state of mind, but still not too pleased. The sun was noticeably hitting his sensitive eyes. The Uchiha frowned from this light, and because of the man's expression, the road in front of him miraculously became empty. Even the police squads of clansmen scurrying back and forth tried to attract as little attention as possible. At first, Hashirama and Madara's life together, naturally, did not resemble such a thing. Friendship is friendship, although it would be a stretch to call them friends, but living under the same roof turned out to be unexpectedly difficult. Both heirs had been brainwashed since childhood that the other clan was the embodiment of evil. And their younger brothers were even more irritating than their dads. And their clanmates. But over time everything worked out, and life got better. If it weren't for Hashirama, and Madara admitted it, everything would have fallen apart in the first months. The Uchiha had an explosive, angry character, and only Hashirama was able to calm him down somehow. Senju told his husband that, despite the absence of a wife as such, they were still connected. All three of them. And that the family needed to be preserved, so that the wife, when she had her fill of fun, and when Senju himself had her fill of fun. For some reason, Hashirama was sure that their strange union would last. Perhaps it was because their engagement was amazing. In a bad sense of the word. Phantom pains in the chakra channels after meeting the demons of the Temple of Masks plagued both Hashirama and Madara. The shinobi had to learn to live with this. While they were together, the channels did not ache or stretch like veins. But it was worth it to quarrel or not sleep in the same bed for a couple of months, and the body began to slowly twist. Tolerable, but how unpleasant. Madara and Hashirama's house stood on the outskirts, practically in the forest, raised by the restless Senju. A small one-story mansion made of light wood with very strong walls and ceiling beams. Although the spouses rarely quarreled, their disagreements usually had a continental scale. So the house was fortified in every possible way, from Uzumaki seals to the use of rare materials. There was not a crumb in the cellar. Hashirama had cleaned everything out, not even leaving a stray carrot. A tamagoyaki plate remained on the dining table, carefully licked, but not washed. Madara winced, but didn't touch the plate. Hashirama would come back and clean it up. Senju always did this, all the mess he made during the day, he would clean up before going to bed. Madara preferred to clean up right away, so that in the evening he would be free to make fun of his husband. At least some entertainment in this village. He wondered how Uzumaki Yuzuko would clean up. She was blind, so she wasn't independent. Or was she? After all, she was an excellent fighter, and she had been hiding from 3 clans for over 10 years. Almost 13, to be more precise. She was the same age as Madara and Hashirama, and Uchiha would soon be celebrating her 26th birthday. It's a good thing Konoha was founded in a warm area. Even in November it was nice here, no snow or cold, only rare but heavy rains. Madara didn't like being cold, and he couldn't stand the snow. For lunch, they had to go to the nearest popular eatery. They cooked good rice with vegetables, and there were salads too. Madara couldn't, like Hashirama, eat the usual ramen, onigiri, and microkebabs. No, it was better to eat more substantial food, a main course, a salad, and the obligatory dessert. Madara liked sweets, but not soups. The younger brother was found in the diner, actively gesturing. Madara raised his eyebrows in interest. Izuna was somewhat more emotional in everyday life than the average representative of the clan, but as a rule, he did not reach such behavior. No waving of arms, loud voice, obvious display of emotions. Interesting. I am glad to see you, oh my resurrected brother, Madara greeted Izuna. Would you like to introduce your companion? Izuna winced. Yes, Madara was deliberately pushing the issue that was unpleasant for his brother. And he would continue to push, because the younger brother should at least turn on his brain sometime if Tobirama was around. After the nervous jitters from his brother's resurrection had subsided, Madara promised Izuna just one thing: if he saw even one conflict with Tobirama, he would simply marry them, even without the bonding buffer of a woman. Izuna swore an oath not to even approach the younger Senju in response to such a threat. By the way, he kept his promise so far. But Madara didn't relax. His brother always liked to screw with him at the very moment when he stopped watching the situation. So, constant vigilance for this, cunning, like a weasel, shinobi. Ah, Madara, Izuna responded nervously. We were just on our way to see you, yes. How are you here? I thought you were supposed to be working. You probably didn't get to me, Madara chuckled. And work, it's not a wolf, it won't run away. I decided to take a rest. Well, she wanted to eat, muttered Izuna, embarrassed. So we came in. Madara rolled his eyes, walked under the canopy of the diner and sat down on a chair next to the girl. His brother's companion was clearly of noble blood, although she did not look her best. Dirty and torn clothes, no shoes, with bruises growing on her bare arms. But her bearing, straight back and special way of holding her head were impossible not to notice. As was the iron hoop over her eyes, and the fact that the girl did not even turn towards Madara. Although she smiled. Madara learned to communicate with the blind even more carefully than with the highborn. Hashirama made him do it. Not to consider them beneath him, not to help unless asked, to look at the face when talking, to keep his voice, and 1,000 other rules. Because Senju was sure that their wife would return, and he did not want to fall in her eyes. Madara didn't specify how he was going to fall if Yuzuko didn't see it. My name is Madara, I am the brother of your companion and the head of the Uchiha clan, the man introduced himself. May I know your name? Toph Beifong, the girl said. Of the now defunct Beifong family. For what reason, my dear, did you come to Konoha? A plate full of ramen was placed in front of the girl. Madara barely grimaced at this, a kettle of boiling water, several tiny bowls of snacks and one plate with a simply huge, impossibly soft steamed bun. The girl immediately grabbed it, amazingly accurately determining the location of the plate. I heard this place has the best ramen, Beifong said, pouring a handful of leaves from her pocket into the boiling water. It smelled like excellent herbal tea. Izuna's companion was obviously hungry, and therefore not very talkative. Madara understood her. He himself became quite furious if he did not eat for a long time. Therefore, he turned his gaze to Izuna, who was still standing, indicating with his eyes that his brother should sit down. This kid was always bringing all sorts of animals into the house. Sometimes rabbits, sometimes wolf cubs, sometimes foxes. Now he brought a highborn blind girl. Only the size of these gifts changes with age. I thought Toph might have Uchiha genes, Izuna said quietly. I can tell from her face that she has some clan traits. Madara took a closer look at the girl, who was quickly working with chopsticks. The ramen was melting right before his eyes, and the shop owner was already preparing a new portion, following Izuna's silent wave of his hand. This surprised the older Uchiha more than the blind girl, who had a good sense of direction. So, the younger brother had known this girl for a long time? Toph Beifong. Black hair with a rare hint of crimson in the shade and an absolutely impossible unkempt fringe almost to the lips. Fine facial features, high cheekbones, a rather narrow chin. In principle, she really could be one of the Uchiha, but you can only know for sure by the Sharingan. Asking a girl if she had eyes, or if they had been torn out, was the height of bad manners. Madara was the head of the clan after all, so his upbringing did not allow him to say something like that. It would be better to wait and find out in another way whether Beifong had her eyeballs in place. Having made the most brutal expression possible for Izuna, the owner of the eatery almost had a heart attack. His brother furrowed his brows and pleadingly pursed his lips. Madara added a tart voice. It was nice to meet you, Ms. Beifong. My brother will take you to the clan's territory and accommodate you in the guest house. The issue of kinship can be resolved in several ways. We will choose the best one. And then we will decide according to the situation. Toph dabbed her mouth with a napkin. She had taken it from the counter immediately, without fumbling around with her hand, and finally turned her face to Madara. The wide iron band covering her eyes and the long, unevenly cut bangs prevented a proper study of the girl's features. "Of course, Uchiha clan leader," she said. "Thank you for your concern." She bowed her head, as if listening to someone standing over her shoulder. She pursed her lips in an old woman's displeasure and sighed heavily before saying, "I'm planning to stay in Konoha for a long time anyway, so I can use the informal you. Or is that unnecessary?" Her smile was polite but cold, like a fine geisha's. Madara was ready to recognize Beifong as an Uchiha just for her ability to make such an expressionless face. "I think it would be appropriate," he said instead of saying goodbye. Izuna came to his brother's work, where Madara went after a hearty lunch. The younger looked guilty, but ready to fight for his decision to the bitter end. "Well?" Madara said with a threatening note. Izuna hesitated for a few seconds, gathering his courage. "This is the same swamp witch," he said. "I already understood that. I can put two and two together. One mention of an iron blindfold and good coordination is enough to recognize your love in the girl." "It's not love," Izuna suddenly waved his hand wearily, sitting down on a chair in front of his brother's desk. "Besides, I've seen her from such angles, and she spits like a tavern man," the younger one grimaced. "No way. I want a highborn wife, not a cross between a noble beauty and an ill-mannered monster." "Look, I'll find you a girl from Hyuga," Madara grinned, "then you'll whine to me that your wife is too noble." "Then it would be better for Uzumaki," Izuna joined the game. "And she is noble, and the genome will be preserved, and their women are beautiful." "Passionate." Madara's face darkened. The mention of Uzumaki stirred up the barely subsided thoughts about his runaway wife, from which Uchiha had only just begun to recover. And this blind witch had also added fuel to the fire. So it was no surprise that instead of continuing the joke, Madara propped his head up with his hand and smiled sadly. "You know what? You'll be Uzumaki. The Uchihas have had a marriage contract hanging for a long time. I'll pick the most passionate one for you." Izuna turned pale, as expected. The treaty with Uzumaki was made before the seemingly eternal war with Senju. The scroll of agreements, when Madara touched it, almost fell apart from decrepitude. The redheads reacted very quickly to the message from the head of the Red-Eyes. They remembered the ancient agreement there, and the elders were glad to finally fulfill it. Since it didn't work out with the current head of the Uchiha. In just 2 weeks, pretty Uzumaki was sent to Konoha with a small escort of 5 shinobi and 1 tracker. Madara knew the latter because he remembered him from his own failed wedding. This was the Uzumaki who had been chasing Yuzuko for over a year and still couldn't catch her. After Yuzuko's escape, the ranger, of course, got a good dressing down from the Uzumaki chief. The ranger was banished from Uzushio territory for 2 whole months before the elders realized it. Actually, the ranger was banished for good, but he was a good specialist. You couldn't find anyone like him on the road. The man was quickly returned to Uzushio, forced to train a dozen new trackers, and then assigned either as a nanny or a guard for one of the princesses. One of those with a character worse than a cesspool. If Madara hadn't known these details, he would have fallen for Uzumaki Mito's angelic smile and her soft, smooth curves. But Madara knew them, so he treated the Haim with respect, but a healthy amount of caution. Who the hell knows how the girl will react after marriage and what sins she will attribute to her husband's brother for a sidelong glance and an overly wide smile. Naturally, he didn't warn Izuna about anything. Let it be a surprise for his brother. Besides, Madara's instinct told him that the younger one would be happy in marriage. What else was needed? Preparations for the wedding and subsequent nuptials had been in full swing for over 2 weeks. The village continued to build, but was looking forward to the celebration with enthusiasm. It would be the first wedding of such a scale in Konoha. The Uchiha were running around the surrounding areas and catching saboteurs in droves. The Senju were looking around with wide eyes and admiring the intricacy and beauty of wooden decorations, tables, awnings, and so on. Madara was more busy not with searching for possible enemies, but with observing the blind witch. During this time, he, like Izuna, saw her from different angles, polite to the point of squeaking, irritated, laughing until she hiccuped, mockingly cheeky and, indeed, spitting. At the same time, he did not abandon the opinion formed in the first moments of their acquaintance. The girl really did receive a good, perhaps even clan-like upbringing. Madara's Sharingan also said that Toph Beifong carried Uchiha genes. 3 activated Tomo, and the highest form saw the familiar curves in the corners of the lips, inherent to clanmates. So Toph was settled on the clan's lands, albeit in a house on the outskirts. And they began to gently push potential suitors towards her, trying to make everything look decent and random. The genes had to be diluted. Here she showed herself as a real witch, driving away young guys one after another. In front of the squeamish ones, she spat on the ground like a peasant. In front of the simple ones, she began to express herself exclusively in the high style. For each. Beifong found the very style of behavior that irrevocably drove the groom away from her. Madara, to be honest, was practically in love with this. As well as with the witch herself. Practically.